They laughed at me. Not behind my back, not in hushed tones in the kitchen when they thought I'd walked away. No. They laughed at me to my face, at the dinner table, in front of my mother's good china, under the chandelier my grandmother picked out 30 years ago, in the home where I took my very first steps. My sister's boyfriend, a man I had never done a single thing wrong to, pointed his fork at me across the table like I was a joke someone had already told, and looked around at the room full of people I loved, and he said, "So what do you actually do, Isabella, besides nothing?" And they laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough for the silence from the ones who didn't laugh to feel like its own kind of wound. I sat there, 32 years old, in my childhood home, listening to the sound of my own family finding me funny. And I made myself very, very still. Because I have learned something that took me years to understand. The quietest response is often the loudest power. I said nothing. I just reached down, set my wrist on the table, and let the light catch it. The laughter stopped. And what happened next changed everything, not just for that dinner, but for every relationship in that room. For my mother who sat at the head of the table with tears forming at the edges of her eyes, for my sister who suddenly couldn't look at me, and for me, for Isabella Bourne, who had spent the last 3 years building something in silence while everyone assumed I was falling apart. Stay with me, because this story isn't about a watch. It was never about the watch. It's about what happens when people who are supposed to love you choose not to see you, and what it costs them when the truth finally makes itself impossible to ignore. Before I go any further, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to be in your corner, please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. Hit that button right now, because this story, it's just getting started. Let me take you back to the beginning, not of that dinner, but of who I am and where I come from, because you cannot understand what happened that night without understanding the world I was raised in. My name is Isabella Bourne. I'm 32 years old and I live in Washington. And the first thing you should know about me is that I come from a family that loves loudly and wounds quietly. The kind of family that will hold your hand at a funeral and then whisper something cutting about your dress on the walk back to the car. My mother, Abigail Bourne, is one of the most beautiful people I have ever known in my life. She has this way of walking into a room that makes everyone feel like the party finally started. She laughs like she means it, cooks like she's feeding a village, and loves her children with a fierceness that sometimes, only sometimes, tips over into something that looks more like pressure than grace. She always wanted us to be impressive. Not just successful, impressive. There is a difference. My father, Henry Bourne, passed away when I was 24. He was a quiet man, a civil engineer who read novels on Sunday mornings and made the best coffee you have ever tasted in your life. He didn't talk much, but when he did, every word landed like it had been carefully chosen from a shelf where all the other words were just waiting their turn. I miss him every single day, but he left me something before he went, a lesson I didn't understand until much, much later. He said, "Isabella, the world will try to define you before you define yourself. Let it try. Just make sure you finish your work first." I didn't know what he meant then. I do now. My sister is Tessa Bourne. She's 28, 4 years younger than me, and she has always been the version of Bourne that the family shows off at dinner parties. Tessa is beautiful in a way that photographs perfectly. She got my mother's confidence and my father's bone structure, and somehow ended up with all of the room's attention in every room she has ever entered. I love Tessa. I want to make that very clear from the start. Love is complicated. Love does not mean someone has never hurt you. Love does not mean you have never sat in your car in a parking garage and cried because someone who shares your blood made you feel invisible again. I love Tessa. And Tessa hurt me in ways she still hasn't fully reckoned with. Then there's Jordan. Jordan Harlow came into Tessa's life about 18 months before that dinner. He's 35, works in finance, and has the specific kind of confidence that comes not from earning it, but from never being told he didn't deserve it. He has good teeth and a firm handshake, and the immediate assumption that everyone in the room wants to impress him. He was wrong about me. He just didn't know it yet. To understand why Jordan's comment hit the way it did, you need to understand what the previous 3 years of my life looked like from the outside. And I mean from the outside, because what it looked like and what it actually was were two very, very different things. When I was 29, I left my position at a mid-sized consulting firm in Seattle. I had been there for 6 years. I was good at my job. I was not in love with my job. There is a difference, and pretending there isn't costs you things you cannot get back. I left to build something of my own. Now, the word left in that sentence sounds very clean and intentional. It was, in the way that jumping off a cliff is intentional. You make the choice, but the falling is still the falling. I spent the first 6 months in what I can only describe as productive chaos. I was developing a consulting framework of my own, a proprietary methodology for organizational restructuring that I believed deeply and without anyone to validate me, was genuinely different from what was already out there. I had a small but growing client list. I was working 16-hour days in my apartment, eating cereal at 11 at night, and turning down invitations to things because I couldn't stop long enough to breathe. From the outside, I was unemployed. That's the word my family used, not building, not launching, not developing, unemployed. My Aunt Devon, my mother's sister, a woman who measures worth in job titles and zip codes, said at a family gathering when I was 30 that she was worried about Isabella. She said it softly. She said it with her hand on my mother's arm. She said it in the specific tone that people use when they want credit for caring without actually doing anything helpful. My cousin Jasper, who works in real estate and has never met a sentence he couldn't interrupt, asked me at Christmas that year if I needed a loan or something. He made air quotes around the word loan. I still don't entirely understand why. My mother, my beautiful, loving, complicated mother Abigail, started sending me articles, not terrible articles about reinvention and pivoting careers after 30 and how to know when it's time to return to the workforce. She meant well. I know she meant well. But the cumulative effect of well-meaning is still in effect. And Tessa, who had landed a marketing director role at a tech startup and was newly in love with Jordan and glowing with the specific radiance of someone whose life is clicking into place in real time. Tessa started being careful around me. The way you're careful around someone who might be fragile. The way you speak slightly louder than necessary, enunciate a little more, keep the conversation to safe topics. She stopped asking what I was working on. That hurt more than anything else. Because I was working on something real, something that I watched, quietly in the privacy of my own discipline, begin to work. My first major client was a logistics company in Tacoma called Bostic & Reed. They were hemorrhaging talent and didn't know why. I spent 4 months embedded with their executive team, overhauled their internal communication structure from the ground up, and watched their 6-month turnover rate drop by 41%. The CEO, a man named Richard Clark, referred me to 3 other companies before my contract with him was even finished. Then came Ian Morley. Ian ran a family-owned pharmaceutical distribution company that his father had built and that he was slowly, unintentionally dismantling. I restructured their management layer, helped them identify and correct a procurement process that was costing them nearly $800,000 a year in inefficiencies, and watched Ian go from considering bankruptcy to posting the company's best quarter in 11 years. Then came Echo Ventures. Echo Ventures was the one that changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is this. By the time that dinner happened, by the time Jordan Harlow pointed his fork at me across my mother's good china, I was not unemployed. I had never been unemployed. I had been quiet. And quiet, I have learned, makes people very uncomfortable. Because they cannot categorize you, they cannot place you, and when they cannot place you, they fill in the blank themselves. And what they fill in is almost always the worst version of what they imagined. It was a Saturday in October. My mother had been planning this dinner for 3 weeks. She does that. She plans gatherings with the same energy other people reserve for military operations. There were flowers she'd ordered from a specific florist 40 minutes away. There was a roast that had been marinating since Thursday. There were cloth napkins she'd ironed herself, which I know because she mentioned ironing them twice in the group chat. The guest list. My mother Abigail at the head. My sister Tessa and Jordan. My Aunt Devon and her husband Bob. My cousin Jasper and his wife Tasia. My mother's oldest friend, a woman named Morley Griffin who has known our family for 25 years and who I've always adored. And me. Just me. No plus one, no partner. Another data point for people who were already drawing their own conclusions. I arrived a little late, not intentionally. I had been on a call that ran long, and when I walked in, the gathering had that warm room energy where everyone is already halfway through their first drink and the conversations are loose and easy. Jordan was holding court near the fireplace. That's the only way I can describe it. He was standing with a drink, gesturing expansively, and everyone near him was oriented toward him the way flowers orient toward light. He was telling a story about a deal he'd closed, something involving a company called Blake Capital, and a negotiation that had apparently lasted 3 days and ended with him emerging victorious and everyone else presumably in ruins. He was good at stories, I will give him that. My mother hugged me at the door and held on a half-second longer than she normally would. I felt it, she felt it too. We didn't say anything about it. Tessa kissed my cheek and introduced Jordan, who shook my hand with that particular firmness that's actually about dominance and not greeting. Isabella, he said, as though the name was new information. I've heard a lot about you. Good things, I hope, I said, which is what you say. He smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, sure. That was the first moment. Dinner was lovely, genuinely. My mother outdid herself. The roast was perfect. Morley told a story about a trip she'd taken to Portugal that had everyone at the table laughing. Even Aunt Devon, who can find something to critique in a Monet, seemed to relax. And then, we were between the main course and dessert. The wine had been refilled. The conversation had drifted into the comfortable territory of everyone asking everyone else about their lives. Jobs, plans, updates. Devon asked Jasper about a property he was listing. Morley asked Tessa about the marketing campaign her company had just launched. My mother talked about a garden renovation she was considering. And then Jordan, who had been watching me with that small assessing look for most of the evening, leaned back in his chair, tilted his wineglass toward me, and said it. So what do you actually do, Isabella? Like, day to day, what does your life look like? It wasn't a genuine question. I knew that immediately. Genuine questions don't come with that particular tone, the one that's already decided on the answer before you've given it. Genuine questions don't make the room go slightly quieter in the way that happens when everyone senses a moment they might want to remember. I run my own consulting practice, I said, calm, even, clear. Jordan nodded slowly. That performative nod, that means I am processing information I find insufficient. Consulting, he repeated. Right, what kind? Organizational restructuring, primarily mid-size companies, efficiency, retention, internal systems. Another nod. He looked at Tessa with a small smile. Just a small one, just enough. That sounds flexible, he said. The pause before flexible did all the work. Do you have like regular clients, or is it more project to project? I have a portfolio of ongoing clients, I said, and I take project work selectively. Selectively, he repeated the word back to me with a tiny curve at the corner of his mouth. Nice word for it. He looked around the table, and he said it. So what do you actually do, Isabella, besides nothing? Jasper laughed first. A short, reflexive laugh, the kind that surprises even the person doing it, and that he probably regretted before the sound had finished leaving his mouth, but that he didn't stop. Devon covered her mouth with 2 fingers, which is what Devon does when she finds something inappropriately funny, but wants to maintain plausible deniability. Bob made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was close enough. Tassia looked at her plate. Morley looked at me. My mother looked at her hands. Tessa said, "Jordan," but she said it soft, not a correction, more like a slight cringe at bad timing. The room lasted in that moment for what felt like a full minute, though I know it was probably 3 seconds. I felt something move through me. Not anger, not exactly. More like the very specific clarity you get right before you do something that you know is right. I looked at Jordan, steady. I reached down to my wrist. I set my arm on the table. I let the light catch the watch. I need you to stay with me right now, because what happened next, what came out at that table, what my mother said, what Tessa did, and what it cost Jordan, changes everything you think you understand about this moment. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. I'll be right back. Here is what you need to know about the watch. It was a gift. Not to me. Well, eventually to me, but its origin matters. It belonged to my father, Henry Bourne. He had acquired it over 10 years of very careful, very intentional saving. Not because he was a man who cared about luxury, but because he believed in one thing that he could point to. He said once that every person should have one object in their life that tells the story of their own work. One thing they could look at and say, "I did this, I built this, this is mine." It was a Patek Philippe, a reference that, if you know watches, you know. If you don't, all you need to know is this: it is the kind of timepiece that auction houses fight over, the kind that jewelry experts examine with gloves, the kind that does not sit in a display case, it sits on a wrist because that is what it was made for. Its assessed value at the time of that dinner was $1.2 million. My father left it to me, not to my sister, not to be sold or divided. To me specifically, with a handwritten note that said only, "For Isabella. She will know when to wear it." I had worn it 3 times since he died. Once to his memorial. Once to the closing of my largest contract. And once to that dinner. I had made a decision, getting dressed that evening. Something in me had known, the way you sometimes know things before you have evidence for knowing them, that I would need to be grounded. That the evening had the potential to become something I would need to be anchored through. And so I'd opened the case my father kept it in, and I'd put it on, and I'd looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. He would have laughed, I think. Not unkindly. My father had a laugh that sounded like he was genuinely delighted by the absurdity of things. So when I set my arm on the table, it was not a performance. It was not a reveal staged for dramatic effect. It was simply a truth that had been sitting there all evening, on my wrist, waiting to be seen by people who had chosen not to look. Morley Griffin saw it first. Morley has been going to estate sales and antique watches shows for 20 years. She collects small things, not for their value, but for their stories. And she has an eye for objects that carry weight. She leaned forward. Her expression shifted. "Isabella," she said, her voice was different. "Is that?" "It was my father's," I said. The table went quiet in a different way than it had gone quiet before. Before, it was the quiet of an anticipated embarrassment. Now it was the quiet of recalibration. Morley looked at Jordan, then back at me. "Do you know what you're wearing?" she asked, though I think she already understood that I did. "Yes," I said. Jordan had put down his wine glass at some point. I couldn't say exactly when. "That's he started. "Patek Philippe," Morley said. "Henry kept it very quiet. He wore it once at a dinner I attended years ago. I never forgot it." She looked at me with something that was not quite a smile but contained all the warmth of one. He would be so pleased. My mother made a sound. I looked at her. She was crying. Not the dramatic kind of crying, the quiet, contained kind, where your eyes fill and your jaw tightens, and you are fighting very hard to stay in the room with everyone else. Mom, I said softly. She shook her head. Don't, just give me a moment, Jordan said. How much is it worth? He actually asked that, out loud, at the table. Bob put his hand on the back of his neck. Jasper looked at his plate. Even Tasia, who had seemed content to observe the entire evening from a neutral distance, looked up with an expression that suggested she found the question unfortunate. More than the question deserves, I said. It came out quieter than I expected, not cutting, more tired than anything else. Jordan looked at me for a long moment, and I watched something move across his face. Not quite shame, not quite embarrassment, but something in that territory. Something that recognized it had misjudged the terrain. I didn't mean, he started. Yes, I said, you did, and that's okay, a lot of people do. Dessert happened. My mother served the apple cake she makes every October, the one with the cardamom, and the table found its way back to conversation, but carefully. The way you walk after you've twisted your ankle, functional, but aware. Jordan was quieter. Tessa was watching me in a new way. After dessert, when people were moving to the living room, Morley found me by the window. She put her hand on my arm and said very simply, "Your father chose well." I didn't know if she meant the watch or me. I think she meant both. Aunt Devon, to her small credit, came and stood next to me and said, "I didn't know you were doing so well, Isabella." It was not quite an apology, it wasn't trying to be, but it was something. Bob, who rarely speaks directly to me at family gatherings, asked about my work with what seemed like genuine curiosity. I told him a little about what I'd been building. He nodded and said, "That sounds like important work." It was such a simple thing to say, it meant an outsized amount. Jasper did not apologize for laughing. I did not expect him to. Jasper is not a person who has developed the muscle for that kind of reckoning. Maybe one day, not yet. My mother found me in the kitchen, where I had gone to get water. She stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at me, and then she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me from behind, her cheek against my shoulder, the way she used to hold me when I was small and something had gone wrong at school. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the articles, I didn't know how to see what you were doing. I thought I was helping, but I was just..." "I know," I said. "I should have asked," she said. "I should have asked you to tell me." We stayed like that for a while. The sounds of the living room drifted through the kitchen, Morley laughing at something, Bob's low murmur, the clink of cups. "Dad would have thought tonight was very funny," I said. My mother made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "He absolutely would have. He would have told that story for years." I want to talk about Tessa separately, because what happened between us in the weeks after that dinner is the part of this story that I've spent the most time sitting with. She texted me the night after the dinner. Just, "Can we talk?" I said yes. We met at a coffee place near her apartment 3 days later. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and cold outside, and she was already there when I arrived, with her hands wrapped around a cup. She looked tired. "I should have said something," she said, before I'd even taken my coat off. "When Jordan said that, I said his name, but that was nothing. That was not enough." I sat down. I didn't rush to reassure her. "Why didn't you?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Because I didn't want a scene," she said finally, and I respected her for being honest about it. "And because..." She stopped. "Because you weren't sure he was wrong?" I said. She looked up at me. Her eyes filled. "I didn't know what you were doing," she said. "I kept waiting for you to tell me and you never did, and after a while I assumed. I assumed it wasn't going well and I didn't want to make you feel bad by asking, so I just..." "Stopped asking," I said. "Yes." We sat with that for a while. Here is what I told her. I told her that the people we love don't stop being the people we love when they fail us. But they owe us the work of understanding how they failed us, and they owe us the choice of what to do with that understanding. I told her that I had spent 3 years building something in silence, not because I wanted to be mysterious, but because the early stages of building something real are so fragile that one person's doubt can kill them. I told her that her doubt, her well-meaning, anxious, assumption-filled doubt, had been one of the things I'd had to protect what I was building from. She cried. I didn't rush to fix that either. I want to know, she said. I want to know what you're working on, all of it, if you'll let me. I looked at my sister, my complicated, imperfect, genuinely loving sister, and I thought about the years we'd shared before everything got hard. The way she used to come into my room at night when we were kids and climb into my bed and whisper questions about the stars until one of us fell asleep. The way she'd called me every day for a week when my father died, even though she didn't know what to say, just so I would know she was there. Okay, I said, let's start from the beginning. That conversation lasted 4 hours. We have not missed a weekly call since. I want to be careful here, because I am not interested in making a villain out of a person who is more likely a product of a specific kind of unchecked entitlement than actual malice. Jordan Harlow embarrassed himself at that table. He did something unkind and he knew it, and the knowing of it, which I could see on his face, was its own consequence. He texted me about 2 weeks after the dinner. He said, "Hey Isabella, Tessa told me more about your work. I was a jerk at dinner. I'm sorry." It was not the most expansive apology I've ever received, but it was direct, and I have spent enough time around people who find directness genuinely difficult to appreciate it when I see it. I said, "Thank you for saying that, I appreciate it." I did not say, "It's fine," because it wasn't entirely fine, but I didn't need it to be. I needed it to be acknowledged, and it was. Jordan and I are not close, we may never be. But he has been respectful at every family gathering since, which is what I asked for and what I needed. Tessa is happy with him, in the complicated, negotiated, real-world way that adults in relationships are happy. That matters to me more than whether I like him. Let me tell you about Echo Ventures, because this is the part of the story I haven't told anyone in full, and if you have stayed with me this long, you deserve to know what was actually on the wrist of the woman they called Unemployed. Echo Ventures is a mid-size impact investment firm based in Seattle, founded by a woman named Clark Leon, one of the most precise, demanding, and extraordinary people I have ever had the opportunity to work alongside. Clark had built Echo over 8 years into something that was, by the time she called me, genuinely exceptional in its space and genuinely in crisis underneath the exceptional surface. She found me through Richard Clark, no relation, who had been so effusive in his recommendation that Clark Leon told me later she almost didn't reach out because she thought no one could possibly be as good as Richard said. Our first call lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, I had a 6-month engagement at a rate that made the consulting salary I'd left behind look like a starting offer. By the end of the 6 months, I had a piece of Echo Ventures itself, an equity position, negotiated fair and clean. In exchange for work that had restructured their internal operating model so completely that they went from a company that was 2 bad quarters away from a serious conversation to a company that closed their largest fund in their history in the following fiscal year. I don't say this to list accomplishments, I say it because the thing I was doing in my apartment at 11 at night, eating cereal when my family was worried about me, that thing worked, and the result of it working changed my financial life in ways that are still, honestly, settling. My father's watch, his one object, his proof of his own work, sits now alongside something I am building for myself. Something that will one day have its own story, its own weight, its own moment of light catching on the wrist of someone who needs to be reminded that quiet work is still work, and worth is not determined by who can see it. I am 32 years old. I live in Washington. I have a family that loves me imperfectly, and a sister who is learning to see me more clearly, and a mother who sends me recipes now instead of articles, and who called me last week just to say she told someone at her book club about my company and got to brag properly, and she cried a little when she said it. I have a business that I built from a conviction and a laptop and a willingness to be misunderstood for long enough to prove I was right. And I have learned these things, and I will give them to you plainly because you stayed with me and you deserve plain truth. The people who underestimate you are usually not doing it out of cruelty. They're doing it out of their own limitations, their own inability to imagine a kind of work they cannot immediately categorize or validate. That does not make their underestimation okay. But it does make it theirs, not yours. Do not carry it. It doesn't belong to you. The people who love you will sometimes fail you in the exact ways that hurt them most, not because love is insufficient, but because love does not automatically come with the skill of seeing. Seeing is a practice. It can be learned. Sometimes the people who love you learn it, sometimes they don't. You get to decide what you do with both outcomes. Silence is not the same as absence. Some of the most productive, consequential, life-changing work that has ever happened in this world happened in rooms where no one was watching and no one was applauding and no one even knew to ask. Your silence does not mean you are not moving. It might mean you are moving precisely as fast as you need to. And one more thing. My father said, "Let the world try to define you before you define yourself. Just make sure you finish your work first." I finished my work. Not completely. You never completely finish. But enough. Enough to put it on the table. Enough to let the light catch it. You will too. My mother hosted again this October, 1 year after that dinner. The same flowers, more or less. The same roast. The cloth napkins freshly ironed, I'm sure. Jordan was there. Tessa was there, and she sat close to me and kept touching my arm the way she used to when we were small. Jasper and Tasia, Devin and Bob, Morley Griffin, who brought a bottle of wine and hugged me at the door for a long time. A few new people were there too. My mother's neighbor, a widow named Echo Blake, who had recently moved in and who, it turned out, knew half the people in the room from church. And a friend of Morley's, a soft-spoken man named Griffin Harmon, who restores antique instruments and who spent 20 minutes talking to me about the overlap between organizational repair and instrument restoration that I found genuinely fascinating. It was a good evening, really good. At one point, after the main course, Jordan leaned toward me and said, quietly, just for me, "I've been reading about some of the work you did with Echo Ventures. It's genuinely impressive." I looked at him. He seemed like he meant it. "Thank you," I said. "I'd like to hear more about it sometime," he said, "if you're open to that." I thought about it for a genuine moment, not a performative pause, an actual moment of consideration. "Sure," I said. That was it. That was the whole of it. No grand reckoning, no dramatic comeuppance. Just two people at a table, one of whom had made a mistake and said so, and one of whom had decided that was enough to move forward on. This is not the ending of movies, but it is the ending of real life, and I have come to prefer real life to movies for exactly this reason. In real life, people can surprise you. In real life, the table can be the place where things get broken and also carefully put back together. My mother gave a small toast before dessert. She stood up with her wine glass and looked around the table at all of us, the people who had gathered and gathered again, and she said, "I don't have anything very formal to say. I just want to say that I am proud of this family, all of it, even the complicated parts, especially the complicated parts." She looked at me when she said especially. I held her gaze. I did not look away. I wore the watch again that night. I wear it more often now, not to prove anything, not to make a point, but because my father gave it to me to be worn, and because I think he would be pleased to know that it is living on a wrist that is, these days, doing work he would have recognized. Quiet work, important work. Work that does not always look like anything from the outside until the light hits it just right. I have been asked since I started sharing this story, whether I feel like I won. I don't think that's the right frame. No one won at that dinner table. The truth simply showed up, the way truth tends to do when you give it enough time. Not with fanfare, not with an announcement, but with the quiet certainty of something that was always going to be there when you finally turned on the lights. What I feel, more than anything, is grateful. Grateful for my father, who saw something in me worth the note. Grateful for my mother, who is learning to see me and who, in her imperfect, effortful way, is trying. Grateful for Tessa, who showed up to that coffee shop and said I should have said something and meant it with her whole chest. Grateful for Morley Griffin, who saw the watch and, more importantly, saw me. And grateful, genuinely, unexpectedly, for that dinner. For Jordan's careless question and the silence that followed it, and the moment when I reached down to my wrist and let the truth land on the table. Because sometimes you need the room to go quiet before you can hear the thing you've been trying to tell yourself for years. You are not what anyone decided before they looked at you. You are what you built when no one was watching. And that was always, always enough. If this story found you at the right moment, if you have ever been the person at the table who someone chose not to see, please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this, and neither are you. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below telling me about a time you were underestimated. I read every single one, and I will respond. We are building something here in this community together. And just like everything else worth building, it takes time, it takes trust, and it is absolutely worth it. I am Isabella Bourne. I will see you in the next one.